The life-destroying advice given to 99% of people is this: work hard, save money, and buy a house. The brutal truth? That advice was never designed to make you rich. It was designed to keep you on the treadmill while an invisible elite uses time and the system's rules to transfer your wealth into their assets. It's a zero-sum game where the currency is your energy. But what if you could read the secret handbook the wealthiest families have used for 300 years? The playbook that turns inflation, your greatest enemy, into their greatest asset. Stick around, because we're opening the Old Money Handbook. The secret they don't tell you. The first chapter of the Old Money Handbook is a defense. It teaches you why the first step to wealth isn't earning more, but ensuring the money you already have doesn't evaporate. This is about understanding Gresham's law, the principle that states bad money drives out good. It sounds simple, but this 300-year-old phrase is why it feels like your savings are always losing the race no matter how much you save. The elite know that any government, from a monarchy to a modern democracy, will inevitably succumb to the temptation to dilute its currency. They'll do it to fund wars, to pay for deficits, to bail out banks in a crisis, or, as we recently saw, to inject trillions into the economy during a pandemic. And they will do it in a way that ensures the cost falls squarely on you, the saver and the worker. Think of the Byzantine Empire. For centuries, the gold solidus was the most trusted currency in the world. But emperors couldn't help themselves. They started shaving the gold purity, mixing in cheaper alloys. At first, no one noticed. Then, trust cracked. Bad money, the impure coins, was used to pay debts and taxes, and the good money, the old pure coins, was hoarded, melted down, and taken out of circulation. That is Gresham's law in action. People save the real value and get rid of the doubtful value. What survived? Not the paper promises or decrees, but the merchants who silently accumulated real gold or land. The old money elite understood this. Your money in the bank is not a treasure chest. It's a loan you've made to an institution that can decide in a crisis not to pay you back. Look at Lebanon from 2019 to 2021. Banks locked their doors, and the value of the Lebanese pound fell over 90%, annihilating a lifetime of savings. People were trapped. The lesson is cruel but fundamental. Real value flees to assets the system cannot counterfeit. If you don't own those assets, you become the final receptacle of the inflation. But if Gresham teaches you what to avoid, the next principle teaches you what to seek. The Cantillon Effect, why proximity is the greatest asset. This is where the game truly changes. The spine of the Old Money Handbook is the Cantillon Effect, named after the 18th century Franco-Irish economist Richard Cantillon. It describes something most people don't realize is a rule. Money never enters the economy uniformly. When there's an injection of new liquidity, say from a central bank, it enters at a specific point. Cantillon noted that those closest to the source of new money, banks, financiers, the government, and its commercial partners, receive it first. And what did they do? They spend that money before the prices of everything go up. They buy assets, equities, prime real estate, commodities, intellectual property. The price of those assets rises first. Who gets the money last? The working class, who receive it as a wage increase or a social benefit, but only after the cost of living has already skyrocketed. This means the early receivers get the new liquidity at its maximum value and spend it at old prices. The late receivers get the diluted liquidity and spend it at inflated prices. The Cantillon Effect is the wealth transfer mechanism that operates in plain sight, turning inflation from a general phenomenon into a sequential event that impoverishes those furthest away. This is why during the COVID pandemic, while millions struggled to pay rent, housing prices and the stock market soared almost instantly. Those with liquidity and access to credit, The early receivers bought the assets that the late receivers would have to buy later at much higher prices. The Cantillon Effect is the elite blueprint because it rewards position and proximity, not morality or hard work. The question isn't how much money is being created, but who is closest to the machine. This is what the Rothschild dynasty understood perfectly. They positioned themselves as financiers to kings and governments. When governments needed money for war, the Rothschilds were there to finance the debt, turning government promises into assets that would benefit from post-war stability or expansion. They traded with governments and invested heavily in infrastructure and industry, ensuring their capital was always tied to productive assets and growth, the first things to be valued by new capital injection. The Cantillon Effect is not a bug. It is a feature of the modern financial system, and the wealthiest families have been running this playbook for centuries. The crucial lesson is, your wage is an inflatable asset, but productive ownership is an asset that outruns inflation. The elite uses the Cantillon Effect to protect themselves from having to rely on a salary that loses value every day. They build generational fortunes based on the principle of being the early receiver in any injection of new wealth.
The mathematical proof, the Pareto principle, and the 80-20 rule. Now, let's connect the dots. If Gresham's law guarantees that bad money pushes you toward assets, and the Cantillon Effect guarantees that asset prices rise first for those closest to the source, what happens to wealth distribution? The inevitable result is the Pareto principle, the famous 80-20 rule. Originally, economist Vilfredo Pareto observed that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the population. Today, the Pareto principle is a self-replicating rule in economics. A small percentage of the population accumulates a large percentage of the wealth and income. And in the context of Cantillon, the 80-20 split is not a coincidence. It is the mathematical result of a system designed to concentrate capital. Wealth concentration is the logical and inevitable consequence of a monetary system based on centralized issuance. Think about it. With every new cycle of money printing, the 20% closest to the source of capital receive the strongest funds and invest them in assets whose prices soar. The 80% furthest away receive the weakest money and use it to pay already inflated prices for consumer goods. The result? The wealth gap widens with every credit cycle. In places like the US, wealth concentration is a predictable function of the system, with the richest 1% of America increasing their share of total wealth from 23% to 32% since 1989. The Pareto principle, fueled by Cantillon, turns the economy into a concentration engine. This is what Thomas Piketty described in his thesis that R greater than G. The return on capital, R, is structurally greater than economic growth, G. But what Piketty doesn't explain is how you as an individual can flip that R greater than G vector in your own life. We'll get there. If you are earning your wealth solely through labor, G, you are destined to lose to those earning through capital, R. The only way to beat Pareto's law is to shift your income source from G to R, from labor to capital. And that's exactly what the Old Money Handbook teaches. Families like the Wallenbergs in Sweden perfected the art of strategic invisibility. They don't flaunt wealth, they build power and influence behind the scenes. Their legacy isn't in a single company, but in holdings across giants like AstraZeneca and Ericsson, ensuring their capital is in productive assets that benefit from any liquidity injection, thus maintaining their position at the top of the Pareto pyramid regardless of political shifts or crises. This is the essence of old money. It's not just about having money, it's about owning the system that generates it. The Position Guide, how to shift your place in the flow. The Old Money Handbook isn't just an economic history book, it's a positioning guide. It teaches you to stop being a passive victim of the Cantillon Effect and become an active beneficiary. The goal is one, move closer to the source of new wealth. 1. Trade labor for capital. The elite doesn't work for a salary. They work to acquire more productive assets. And the definition of productive asset is much broader than you think. It's about something the system can't print. We'll look at what that is. Cantillon guarantees that while you trade your time for money, salary, the real value is being transferred to the capital owner, your bosses, the shareholders. You must use your salary to buy your way into the early receiver position, meaning owning assets that rise in price before your costs do. Examples include shares in credit-dependent companies, high-growth tech firms, for example, commodities, or crucially, intellectual property and high-value skills. The chef who can feed a community during a crisis or the programmer who builds a new platform aren't limited by the debased solidus. Production never loses meaning. 2. Use debt as a weapon, not a shackle. One of the greatest lessons from old money is that the rich use debt and the poor are used by debt. For most, debt is a cage. Think of the 1997 Asian crisis. Borrowing in a foreign currency is a death trap where the debtor drowns when the storm hits. But the elite playbook teaches that credit, when used to acquire productive assets, leverages your Cantillon position. The key isn't debt itself, but what you buy with it. If you use borrowed money, which is the new liquidity in the system, to buy an asset that appreciates faster than the money is diluted, like a factory, intellectual property, or real estate in growth areas, time and inflation work for you. Your debt is paid back with future money that is worth less, while your asset has appreciated. Debt used for production is a vehicle. Debt used for consumption is a shackle. 3. Master uncertainty, liquidity, and resilience. History repeats the same lesson. Financial crises are actually wealth transfers. For the unprepared, it is ruin. For those with resilience, liquidity, or unprintable assets, it is the opportunity to acquire wealth at fire sale prices. After the 2008 crash, those with cash bought homes at rock-bottom prices, while millions were foreclosed. Survival comes from recognizing what holds real value when illusions collapse. This preparation is what separates the observer from the participant. But how do you maintain liquidity in a world where Gresham ensures that money is dying? The answer lies in how you define money, and that's what we'll unveil next. The final frontier. What the elite believe you must own. At the end of the Old Money Handbook, there is one core principle that unifies Gresham, Cantillon, and Pareto. The only real wealth is that which the government's pen can neither create nor destroy. Anti-inflation assets. The elite's goal is to exchange paper for real things. Historically, this has been gold, silver, or land. Today, this includes scarce digital assets, like Bitcoin, which cannot be diluted like the Byzantine solidus, and above all, productive assets, like factories, Rockefeller's Standard Oil model, which focused on refining and R&D, production, not field speculation, or intellectual property, IP, that generates income. The value of inflexibility. Old money doesn't bend to political promises. The Rothschilds survived the rise and fall of Napoleon, and the Wallenbergs played chess with the Nazis and the Allies. Their key was transnationality and absence of blind loyalty. They didn't trust the stability of a single government or currency. They diversified beyond a single jurisdiction. Your wealth is safe if it can survive a regime change in your own country. Possession is 9/10 of the law. The final principle is simple but crucial. Possession matters. Money in the bank is a promise. The house, the stock, the gold, the business you control are possession. The elite uses structures like trusts and foundations to ensure their assets remain untouchable across generations, protecting them from taxes, creditors, and, most importantly, dilution. In summary, the Old Money Handbook is your guide to moving out of the position of the late receiver and becoming an early receiver. It's your shift from the game of labor, which is what's dying, to the game of capital, which is what's growing. History is clear. You have to be the one who doubts first, not the one who trusts most. Money is information. Your power comes from reading the flow code correctly. You stop reacting to prices and start planning your Cantillon position. The world is entering another monetary experiment, and the same laws will decide the outcomes. The question is, will you be one of the many relying on paper promises, or one of the few holding something real? History doesn't repeat, but if you ignore it, it will crush you all the same. If you want to understand how to prepare for these financial questions, subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. And tell me in the comments, what's your view on the collapse of the dollar? Don't forget to like and follow the channel.